So good evening again for another one of our classes for the Adult Catechumenate. And we have finished the study of the book of Exodus, the first book of the Pentateuch. And now we begin where Exodus leaves off. The last chapter of Exodus that you saw last week, chapter 50, is the death of the patriarch Joseph. Joseph, who was from the tribe of Jacob, the youngest of one of the youngest sons, second youngest in birth. Joseph stays in Egypt, and all of his family, relatives, the clans, all moved to Egypt. Now, where they actually moved, if you look at the map and use your imagination, that of course is present-day Israel. And if you go down to the very bottom and start moving a little bit to the left side, you are coming into Egypt. And down there you have, which was not there at the time, the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was built only in the modern era. But they had this area that could flood over and separate the Middle East from that part down on the far west. And so, very simply, what happened is that the Jewish people, the ones, Abraham's children, if you will, the children of Abraham, coming down, settled in that part, in the northeast part of what is called Egypt. And there is a lot of material about what happened. There are texts found in scholarship, only in the 19th century, about, they're called the Armana, A-R-M-A-N-A, letters. They were found in 1887 in Egypt, and these letters talk about a period of time between 1400 and 1350. Remember, in Old Testament you count backwards, and then at 0 you start counting forward again. This is a period, a very particular period in the history of Egypt. First of all, Egypt begins to move towards a monotheism, belief in one God, which was very unique at that time. Monotheism was not practiced in most of the Middle East. And I'm going to mention names, don't worry about them, because Egyptian names are a pain in the neck. If you've ever been to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, you'll know, or the New York Museum of History. But there is, in this particular period, there is a, one of the pharaohs is called Amenhotep, A-M-E-N-H-O-T-E-P, Amenhotep, which means Emon is satisfied. That's the name he gave himself. Amenhotep. Now, his father was also a pharaoh, because the pharaohs went father to son. And then after him, Ammon began to erase all the other religions in Egypt. Not because he was such a strong believer, but people were distracted from worshiping him. He wanted to be worshipped. And so he decided there will be one God, and I am God's mirror image. And therefore everyone worships me. And so he changed his name to Ahetaton, the horizon of Aton. Aton is this new type of religion. So Amenhotep becomes Ahekataton, and Ahekataton changes his name. Eventually, they all change their names. But what's important, Ahekataton, his wife was Nefertiti. You may have heard that name. So everyone's forgotten the husband. We know the wife. Why? They found their tombs totally preserved. And one of the interesting things about Akhenaton and Nefertiti is that for the first time they depicted the pharaoh with his birth defects. Generally, they looked all very handsome, very high cheekbones, everything beautiful. He must have gotten some artist angry. When they did his tomb, they have him with all of these defects of his face and body. Of course, he's dead. What can he do? And then they put them in the sphinxes and the pyramids so no one sees them again. But when they discovered these bodies, this is what they noted. The perfection in art that was classic Egyptian art was not depicted on the tomb monuments of the emperors at this period, of the pharaohs. And the Amarna letters talk about, these are letters between Akhenaton and his father. These were preserved in clay pots for thousands and thousands of years and discovered in 1887. And they are perfectly legible if you know Egyptian script, the hieroglyphics. And they talk about this sun god. That is the god they began as their prime god, was the god of the sun. So the god of the sun becomes the monotheistic, the one god they worship, the sun. It wasn't popular. The people themselves preferred many gods. But the pharaoh insisted on this one god. And it eventually sunk in. But their whole idea of God revolved around the sun. And the letters show also, this is the interesting part for us. In the letters, the Pharaoh is complaining to his father about a group of people from Ur, the children of Abraham, from Ur, way over the other side of Asia Minor, settling in on the northeast corner of their country and had taken over the power, something we don't realize. By the time of Joseph, actually Israelites had governorship over parts of these areas. The Egyptians weren't in charge, the Israelites were. And the book of Genesis ends and then skips to Moses, and it's skipping quite a number of years. What happened is that these people became their own rulers, and the Egyptians were lesser. And then, as always happens, they began to try to take over, if you will, the Israelites. And this begins the enslavement that we open the book of Exodus with. How they went from being quite settled, very populous, one of the things you see in Exodus, they had children. They had many children. And the Pharaoh tried to stop their number by stopping birth, by literally killing all the male children. So that you will see the story in the very beginning of Exodus where the Pharaoh has an edict that the women who assisted, the midwives who assisted a birth, are ordered to strangle every male child that comes out of the womb. Most of the midwives were Israelites, and they're being told to kill their own male children, offspring. And what do? They don't. They don't do it. And whenever the Egyptians get angry, and they say why, if you read the story already, they have a good answer. Israeli women are strong. Baby come out fast. So the baby's on the ground before the midwife can strangle it. Very good explanation. How it was thousands of babies, well, it took the Egyptians a while to figure that out. But that is how it happened. They went from being very settled and integrated, if you will, with Egyptian society. Then over a period of decades, the power moved. They became too powerful, and the pharaohs became too powerless. And so they plotted to take back power. And this is when the book of Exodus begins. So it starts first with the setting of the scene. That Jacob's descendants in Egypt. And you will see how they get from Joseph all the way down to where they are, literally in a few lines. They multiplied and became so very numerous that the land was filled with them. So what I just told you in a long way, they did in one sentence. Probably that was the better way. And then they go right away to the oppression. How did they become enslaved? So they do this, now a new king who knew nothing of Joseph. So we're moving generations away from the arrival of the Israelites, rose to power in Egypt. And he said to his people, see, the Israelite people have multiplied and become more numerous than we are. Come, let us deal shrewdly, etc., etc. And the story of the midwives being ordered to kill the male children when the women are in labor. In the meantime, they also enslave the Israelites. And what happens too is this is the exact period of time, 14 to 1350 down to around that period, they begin building the pyramids and the sphinxes. Those are not really, if you've been to Egypt, you know, the sphinxes and the pyramids are not in Cairo. It's quite a trip upriver, the Nile, to get to where they are. I've done it once, never again. I had a tour guide whose name was Moses. I knew I was not going to the promised land. He was the biggest, no, I'm on TV. It was an unfortunate trip because in the days I went to Israel to Egypt was 1974. And as an American, there had just been a war with 72, 73. And anyone coming in, you had to sign up for a tour before you left the airport. And you had to pay in advance before you left the airport. It was a little strange. And the next morning, they picked us up. I was staying at the Hotel Cleopatra. It was built while she was there. It was that old. The plumbing was awful. The rooms were awful. The beds were awful. But again, what do you do when you're doing, what was I doing? Egypt on $5 a day. And that was the room for $2. So we went on the tour with Moses. There was this little guy who had 5 wives and innumerable children that he made us pay for before we got off the bus at the end. Anyway, we went down there. These tombs, the pharaohs, the sphinxes, and the pyramids, had to be built by slave labor. If you have seen them, they are a marvel of genius in architecture. Especially when you realize inside the pyramids are hidden passages, because they were burial chambers for the pharaohs. Have anyone been to Egypt? Just me? Oh, you don't know what you're missing. Don't go. If you find Moses, kill him. Oh, no. Oh, I'm on TV. I want my money back. It is fascinating because you're crawling up these hidden passageways that have now been uncovered through archaeology to the inner chambers where the pharaohs were buried, mostly with their whole family buried alive with them and their slaves. Because they didn't want to go alone to wherever they went. So the pharaoh would die, the queen would be killed and buried with him, and all their household staff, not the heir, obviously, but the other people, all the way down to their house pets were buried with them. And so the interior of the pyramid, where the central chamber is, these are extensive caves or rooms. And they were all set apart and locked because the way they would bury the emperor, the pharaoh and his wife, would be buried in the most center of the pyramid, with rooms filled with gold, silver, and other treasures. Then they would seal the room on their way out. So every doorway in was sealed as they went to the next, the next, the next. It's a pyramid. And it's all hidden passages that stayed locked for centuries. No one could get in them. Of course, they had many myths about if you go in, you'll be attacked by, some of you may have seen those fabulous movies where they have these evil spirits lurking around the tomb of the Pharaoh. But it was because they put these curses on the tomb to keep people from stealing the treasures. So this is, the treasures are not there. They're in museums all over the world. The pharaohs are not there. Most of the pharaohs' coffins, caskets, sarcophagus as they're called, are now in museums, in the Egyptian museum, most of them, a few in New York, a few in London, other places. Now, I say all this to say the Israelites come already somewhat monotheistic, believing in one God, the God of Abraham. They are now merging with a culture that is becoming monotheistic, but around the sun. The sun is their God. And they come in first. One of the things to notice, I'm going to go off camera, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, is up here, north of all this. And what happens is that they have come through there to get to Egypt. So they know what's there. When they leave Egypt in the Exodus, the event of leaving, when they leave, they go back to that part of the world, not where they came from, but because God gives them the promised land. That's the whole reason of the book of Exodus. It will go from deliverance to a covenant to a conquest. I've taken all the books of Exodus, all 40 books, 3 stages. Deliverance, getting out of Egypt. Covenant, the desert experience, 40 years roaming around in the desert, being formed as a people around the covenant, the 10 Commandments. The conquest, crossing over into the promised land and conquering Canaan. And it becomes now what is present-day Israel. That's the whole book in a few minutes. The earlier book of Genesis leads up to the Exodus by explaining the origin of the people of the Exodus. And they become for us, the importance of the Exodus is these people in the Exodus become God's kingdom on earth. They become God's people. It is in Exodus that God forms them as a people of God. That's the most important part of the Exodus. So, it explains the call of Abraham from Ur in Mesopotamia to be the forefather of these people, and how the promises that God made to Abraham and his descendants, I will make you plentiful on earth, and I will enrich you and bless you with new lands, etc. So the final part of Exodus tells the story of how the sons of Jacob are called literally Israel. That's their name, the whole group. They are called Israel. They go down to Egypt. They settle there. And there, God has prepared them to be there. But then, the link between Genesis and Exodus is given in the last words of Joseph, where he says to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will certainly come to you and lead you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is verse 24 of chapter 50 of Genesis, the very end of Genesis, page 64. So God tells Joseph, this is what I'm promising. And Joseph tells his people on his deathbed, this is what God will do. So it sets the scene. These two sections can be divided in the two sections of the story of Exodus, which is the first books 1 to 18, is the escape. Preparing and the escape. This is section 1. Section 2 is what happens after they escape. And so this can be then divided, these two parts, into what I have here, chapters 1 to 12, preparing. The people preparing to leave. So you're going to have the story of Moses. He will be introduced very quickly on the scene. We have to get him into the center of the story, because the book of Exodus is the story of Moses. Just like Genesis is the story of Abraham and his descendants. Now we have the book of Exodus, which is centered on Moses. We have to get them, they have to, the early part of the book of Exodus, I'm going to have to do my papers this way. It puts them there, and then it talks about, very quickly, the command of the midwives, which I mentioned, kill all the male children. Then you have chapter 2, the birth and adoption of Moses. Very quickly, the story is that Moses is born of a Jewish mother, of course, an Israelite woman. She doesn't want to kill him. What happens is that they take the child, wrap the child up, and put him in a basket of bitumen. Bitumen is like tar. So on a reed basket, it makes it, that's how they would put a boat, so the boat won't sink. And they put the baby out in the water, hoping for the best. And out comes Pharaoh's daughter for her daily bath by the river. And she hears the baby crying in the reeds, and she goes in with her maids. They take out the baby. She sees it's a baby boy, and she likes the baby boy. He's nice and cute and quiet. And right away, the sister of Moses, the older sister, who is just there, says, "Do you want me to find an Israelite woman who can nurse the baby?" And she gets Moses' mother and brings her back. But the baby is now raised as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he immediately rises in stature to that. And she is the one that gives him the name Moses, because it means, "I drew him out of the water." That's what the word means in the Egyptian word. Then very quickly it says Moses was a bad guy. Moses knew he was Israelite in background, but attached to the house of the Pharaoh through the Pharaoh's daughter. He was privileged. He was rich. He was elite. And he once saw two Israelites fighting, and he goes to break it up. And then in the course of doing that, one of them is killed. Then, no, I'm sorry, I'm jumping up. Moses had grown up, and when he had gone out to see his kinsmen and witnessed their forced labor, that's right, he saw an Egyptian striking one of the Israelites. So he waits for the Egyptian to be alone, and he kills him. Doesn't think anyone sees it. Then later on, he runs into two Israelites fighting, and he tries to break it up, and they say, "What, are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" And he realizes, as we all know, once one person knows the secret, everyone knows. And Moses flees. And he goes to Midian. Where's Midian? East. And he runs out to Midian. And he goes, very luckily, he lands at the tent of a Midian man who had 7 daughters. So Moses gets married. Not to all 7, but he found a wife among the 7. That's all kind of, and he stays there, tending sheep and working for his father-in-law. And it's at that point, they really run quickly with the story. You come to the end of chapter 2. Moses is out in the wilderness with the sheep, tending his father-in-law's sheep and goats, and he sees a burning bush on fire, but the fire doesn't consume the bush. And while he's doing this, he hears, he sees an angel in the bush. This is going to be one of the second or third time we hear the word angel, a messenger. But he hears a voice, and he first tries to approach the bush, and then he's told, "Take your shoes off, this is sacred space." This becomes an explanation of the Middle Eastern custom that in a holy place you remove your shoes. You don't wear, your feet are not covered. Again, if you go to the Middle East now, try to go into a mosque. The first thing they do is tell you take your shoes and socks off, or cover your feet with cloth so your feet don't touch the surface of the mosque. This is a holdover of this ancient custom of showing respect by going barefoot on holy ground. So this is what happens here. So here you have God now speaking. He calls Moses, Moses, Moses. And Moses answered, Here I am. This is on page 68. God says, Do not come near. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hides his face. Hiding your face is a symbol of abject humility in front of someone greater, because he was afraid to look at God. Where did you hear that phrase before? Adam and Eve. When they discover they are naked, they hide because they are afraid to see God. So it is an acknowledgement of sinful nature. And here the next part is called the call and the commission. So here the Lord will command Moses, this is what I want you to do. I want you to free the Israelites. Moses argues, who am I? Why pick me? Pick someone else. If I go back, I'll be arrested. But God insists. And then Moses says, well, give me your name. Who are you? And he answers with the enigmatic phrase, I am who am. They cannot even pronounce the word in Hebrew because it is too sacred. They don't even like us doing the translation, I am who am, here. It's Yahweh. It's literally 4 consonants missing the vowel that would connect him, which is where we get the word we're not supposed to use anymore, Yahweh. Yahweh, I am who am. And this is how God reveals himself, his epiphany, to Moses. I am who am, and I will lead you and the people out. So in the first section, this chapter is 1 through 12, we find the Israelites stuck in oppressive Egyptian system. The people are enslaved. The child Moses is a great-grandson of Levi, one of the younger brothers of the tribe of Jacob, of the 12 tribes. Moses grows up in prominence, and then he runs away and God sends him back. And you're going to have, and I'll ask you to read this on your own, all of the tests with Pharaoh and Moses. To illustrate God's power and to convince Pharaoh to let the people go. Why would he let them go? They were his slaves. He doesn't want them to go. And so God sends punishments as signs. There are the plagues that are sent. And this is going to be, let me see. Where do they have the plagues begin on page 73. And they're altogether 10 plagues. So page 73, chapter 7, and going into 8. The first thing, Moses will do a miracle that's not a plague. He has a rod, like a shepherd's staff, and he strikes it to the ground, and it turns into this big snake. Of course, we're going back to Adam and Eve and the serpent. Everyone hates snakes. Everyone runs away from snakes. I do too. When I used to live in Tanzania, I lived among a people who had snake dancers. I hated that. every time we had a party, a feast, we would have the dancing with these pythons, and cobras that were just huge. And while they told us that they were defanged, meaning the poison was taken out, I didn't believe it. But you would be at a party, and all of a sudden everyone forms into a big circle, and everyone, men and women, are dancing together, and then someone throws a big 36 feet long python in the middle of it. And there's one crazy guy dancing around with the python, trying to hypnotize the python. The rest of us were hypnotized in fear. But this guy's dancing around with the python, the snake charmer. And I witnessed one time the python raising its head and taking a chunk out of the guy's calf as I ran as fast as I could. And of course I'm thinking, I'm wearing long pants, everyone else is in shorts. The python would have just gotten my cheap pants. Anyway, those things are frightening, and if you're eaten by a poisonous python, you die very quickly. Though we did have, this is an old mission story, all of us carried 3 little black pebbles in a piece of newspaper in our pocket. These came from us, all of us in Africa, in Tanzania, had these. They are a black stone, it's magic. You boil it in milk, let it dry out. If you get bitten by any poisonous snake or insect, you take out your handy knife, which we all had, you cut into where the bite was. You cut like an X and draw blood, and put one of the stones, I would have demonstrated, but you put the stone on. The blood sucks into the stone. The stone sucks the blood, so it's like glue. And it doesn't fall off until all the venom is absorbed into the stone. Then it falls off. What do? You take it home, boil it in milk, don't drink the milk, boil it in the milk, and put it back, and save it for another day. They work. I used to use them for insect bites and other things, not for pythons. I was faster at running. But we're all afraid of snakes. I once ran through a screen door, literally. I was coming out of my language school. We had a door this size, all screen, with one piece of wood in the middle. I walked out to the veranda, and there was a spitting python that sits up. When they're up, they're ready to spit. I didn't even ask his name. I turned and ran. I didn't open the door. I ran through the door, back into the dining room screaming, with everyone else screaming after me. Snakes scare people. So by Moses striking the stick to the ground, it was to instill fear in the heart of Pharaoh, because everyone knew snake bites lead to death. It was just a death sentence. After Pharaoh doesn't fall for these tests, then God begins the 10 plagues. I will not go through them all, but they are very interesting plagues. But at the very last plague is the death of the first son of everyone. So each of the plagues gets worse and worse. Again, what I mentioned last week, if you want to see it all, Google the 10 Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille, and you can watch them, quietly at home. But they begin with turning water into blood, then frogs all over the land, then gnats, bugs that bite you, then flies, which everyone hates, boils on your skin coming out, then hail, stone. That's not a plague. I would think I love Siberia. I would have loved that. Then you have, after that, locusts covering if you know what locusts do, they eat everything. If you've ever seen locusts, they come in, it's like a mulcher of trees coming in. They eat every leaf on a bush in a matter of seconds. That's the 8th plague. The 9th plague is the darkness, no sun. Probably it was an eclipse, because that's the only explanation for it. And then finally, the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn son, which affects every house, including Pharaoh's son dies. And at this point, because his son is killed, he finally says, get lost, get out. I want you out. And it opens the way for the passing over. The Passover. Really, this is two words put together, the passing over. The Exodus, the escape. They are now told, get out. And what happens is, this is the night that they're going to do this plague, the 10th plague is going around. Moses tells the people to prepare this meal, this Passover. Everyone is to kill a baby lamb. If you don't have enough people to eat it, join with your neighbors. But everyone does this. They take the blood of the lamb and they paint it this way over the lintel of their homes to protect them from the angel of death, who is coming through to strike all the firstborn dead. The Israelites don't lose any children because of this protection from the angel of death. So this is all chapter 11 and 12, which describes the passing over, and eventually the promulgation of the Passover. Every year on this night, the Jewish people celebrate the Passover feast to remember their deliverance from Egypt. So even now, it's usually in the month of Nisan, not the car, but the Jewish month. March, April is the month of Nisan. And the month of Nisan, when you have the full moon, immediately after that is the Passover. We do the Sunday after the full moon is our Easter. So the celebration of Easter goes back to the passing over. For us, it's the liberation by Christ. For them, it's their deliverance from slavery in Egypt. And with that, it continues. After they depart, all their families leave and they go out in the night to this escape, this great exodus. Pharaoh relents and says, wait, what did I do? Who's going to continue building my pyramid? And he sends his army after them. And so what happens is that after that, they go to the Dead Sea. And you're going to begin now here, chapters, am I at 12? Yes, 12 through 18. The actual deliverance crossing the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a marsh. It is not like a sea like we have here, the South China Sea. It is more of a marsh that fills up during rainy times and dries up during dry times. And what happens here is that this marsh that was full of water somehow miraculously dries up so that the people of Israel can go through safely without mud or anything, but then the waters come back. Okay, this is a natural phenomenon of this body of water. But what happens is the timing is the miracle. It timed that the Israelites all get over the sea safely. The flood waters come back and drown the entire army of the Egyptians. And that ends with chapter 15, where they sing this song, I will sing to the Lord, for he has delivered us. So that but it gets them across the river, and it begins the third part, getting into the desert. So the third section, the Hebrew people in chapter 19 get from from the Red Sea, they get into what is the lower part of Israel, but they get up to Mount Sinai, Sinai Mountain. Now the Sinai Peninsula is down here. You see desert? It's all down in this area. But in your Bibles, you'll find a map that shows it more completely. Mount Sinai, where Moses goes up the mountain and gets the 10 Commandments. And where I am who am now is, I am your God. I wrote it somewhere. I have it in my notes. That's where. I am your God. You are my people, the covenant. And so Moses leaves the people at the base camp on Mount Sinai, and he goes up the mountain. So we're going to see this, let me see, chapter 19. Yes. So they arrived in the Sinai Desert. The Sinai Desert is down south, a little more south than what we're looking at. And there is this mountain. So they make a encampment there, an encampment. If you see the movie, it's wonderful. Moses goes up the mountain to meet God. In the meantime, the people are getting antsy, and they are still teetering back and forth with the Egyptian gods. Remember, I said that they were generally monotheistic, but the idea of creating a golden calf goes back to a more ancient religion that they passed through to get to Egypt. That would be something in the Babylonian area. And so they pick that up, and they have it in the back of their minds. In case this God doesn't work, let's try another one, and another one. You know, I don't like to poke fun, but you see it a lot here, where you have a Buddhist temple and a Taoist temple next to each other. Two different religions, similar philosophies, but two different things. Why next door? Well, if one doesn't work, go to the other, or go back. We do it in Christianity, oddly. The town I live in Tanzania, they zoned only one section for churches. Of course, it was a Swedish company, Scandinavian, so they thought we would all live together as a happy family. So you have the Catholic Church, the mosque, the Hindu temple, the Lutheran church, the Pentecostal church, and a Baptist church, all next to each other. And we were on a lower part of a hill from the mosque. And I, being so mean, I raised pigs because we could. We were Catholic. We had no problem with pork. And so I was raising about 50 pigs in our backyard, which was rather smelly if you raise pigs. And the smell was going upwind into the mosque, which caused almost a religious war between the imam and us. And the police came and said, you have to do something so the smell goes the other way. We had no electricity. What do I do? Fans? Air conditioning? Yeah. I said to them, move the mosque. It's easier for them to move than for me to kill my pigs. Eventually, we figured something out. We put bushes up of flowering plants. They're called Queen of the Night. It's a very, very perfumey plant that at night smells like very, very expensive perfume. So at night, the pig smell became aromatic by a miracle. Okay, going back. I survived that. Then we had the next war with the mosque was bells. They hate bells. We Catholics love bells. And I put up a bell tower. And they would, every time I rang the bell, they would start the call to the mosque. So we had a war going on. I'm ringing bells and they're singing in the loudspeaker until the police told us both to stop. And I rang the bell at the end. I got the last ring in. They couldn't wait for me to leave. So you have, while Moses is up on the mountain, you have the appearance of the Ten Commandments. God writing his law on stone. They are using figurative speech. God doesn't write, and he definitely was not going to be some kind of chiseler. But the idea is when we say in law, it is written in stone. Lawyers know what it means. This is not the time for liberal interpretation. It's the time for what we call constitutional interpretation. It says what it says, not what you think it says. So the Ten Commandments, here it is God writes in stone. It is meant to be preserved. So what does Moses do with these two beautiful tablets of stone? He comes down from the mountain. I'm jumping a lot of chapters together. The people have created a golden calf. They're dancing crazy around the fire with the calf. Moses takes the stone tablets and hurls them, and in the movie it's like the first nuclear explosion in humanity as this thing blows up. I don't see stone going into fire anyway, but it blows up and it kills the calf. And then miraculously Moses has new tablets, but we don't go there. The idea is that the tablets destroy the idolatry. That's the point of the story. The tablets, the law, the tablets, the 10 Commandments, the law, destroy this fake idolatry. So what does Moses do? Then he will now preserve the tablets in a special tent, a place. And this is called the tabernacle, which I wrote some, didn't I? Yeah. The ark and the tabernacle. The ark is a construction of wood. You'll see in the Bible, there may be a picture somewhere. The Ark of the Covenant. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but from the scriptures we can kind of draw it. It is a rectangular box with a roof. There are angels at the four corners with their wings spread. You have the angel here, here, there, and their wings spread like a covering over the ark. And the ark is on poles, and they carry the ark on the poles. And then when they are not moving, the ark sits in a tabernacle, a big tent, a special tent. So this becomes the ark in the tabernacle. That's where these words come from. Again, in these later chapters, on part 4, 24 to 5 to 40, you will see how this is all done. And the book of Exodus concludes with the setting up of the tabernacle and God's presence coming to dwell in it as a cloud. Now, you will see, as they're roaming around with the Ark of the Covenant, they are the first example of why GPS is needed. Remember, I'm going to tell a bad joke, ladies, for your appreciation. It is a patriarchal society, so men lead everywhere. It should have been a matriarchal society. They would not have spent 40 years going in a circle, because women are not afraid to ask directions. If you've ever been with a man in a car, and you say, and the man won't admit he's lost, but you know he's lost. And you say, so should we ask directions? No, I know where I'm going. And they will go in the wrong direction for an hour, telling you this is a shortcut, and you know it's not. So for the peace of the marriage, you keep quiet. But men in general don't like to ask directions. Why? My GPS only has a man's voice. One day, one of my classmates took my GPS while I was out getting gas and switched it to a female voice. This is a horrible story. I got back in, and this female starts telling me, you're going the wrong way. And I tried to throw the GPS out the window. For an hour, I'm listening to a man saying, oh, you passed your turn. You're going the wrong way. Oh, you passed your turn again. Oh, fine. No problem. Guy to guy. But when I heard the woman's voice, I was like, ah! Because it was like my mother in the car again. I always made my mother sit in the back seat. And I wore earmuffs so I wouldn't have to listen. But that's how I survived driving with my mother. She was terrible with directions. But so was I. Actually, I became very good. Living in Africa, our directions were the sun. You learn north, south, east, and west by the sun. And I became an expert in getting through the Serengeti Plains without a map. That's another whole story. That's more of my own salvation, not salvation history. So the book of Exodus, so during the day, they would be roaming around, and they're following a cloud. The cloud would be hovering over this ark. And then at night, it's a pillar of fire. Basically, they were saying that for 24 hours a day, God was protecting them. And whenever they rested, the pillar of cloud or fire just rested over the place. And so the end of the book of Exodus is setting up the tabernacle and God's presence coming to dwell in this place. In the book of Exodus, we have God's revelation, I am who am. And by giving himself this title, he establishes the relationship that we carry even to today between God and humanity. I am your God, you are my people. And it's not for, in the beginning it's for the Israelites. Through the prophets we see it's for everyone. God shows us that he wants to have a kingdom of priests, not meaning me, of holy people, a holy nation. He desires for his people to love and worship him and him alone. Beyond that, he establishes a way for his people to relate to him. You will see throughout the book of Exodus different ways, rituals we use to meet God. So the first one is the Passover meal, where you celebrate this ritual meal every year to remember, anamnesis, a very important term, to remember how God intervened directly in human history. The Mass we celebrate every day is a memorial in the style of the Passover. There is a whole middle section, every Eucharist, I say, and remembering, O Lord, the anamnesis, what you did, what you do, what you will do. And this is what the Passover event is. It reminds the Jewish people how, when they had lost all hope, they were slaves, God intervened and frees them. So the Passover is one way of meeting God. In the Passover meal, Jesus takes the Passover meal in the New Testament. It's the meal he shares before he is put to death. And he changes the symbolism. Where they would say, this is the bread, Barakah Adonai, blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, for through your goodness you have given us this bread. Then Jesus says, this is my body. Then they take the 4 cups of wine, the Hallel cups. And on the 4th cup, which is the cup of salvation, then they have the prayer, blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, Barakah Adonai, with the cup. And then Jesus says, this is the cup of my blood, which will be given for you. So Jesus takes the Passover and now brings it into New Testament time, representing him. What here represents the passing over from slavery to freedom, for us is the passing over from enslavement to sin to salvation as God's people. That's why this is such an important part of Scripture. Because without understanding the Exodus, everything Jesus does doesn't make sense. It is a fulfillment of the Exodus. And then you have the instructions, the tabernacle, having this special place where God dwells. We have tabernacles in our church where the Eucharist is kept so people can pray and know God is there. And we keep a red light burning. God intends in the book of Exodus and in the Sinai event, God intends for his holy people to live in a holy land and to worship in a holy place. He wants a holy people in a holy land, worshiping in a holy place, which is why later the temple in Jerusalem becomes so important for Judaism. The Exodus illustrates God's power to redeem his people from oppression and his willingness to forgive sins. If you want to see God's patience, read this whole book of Exodus. How many times the Israelites turned their backs on God and complained bitterly. If I was God, I would have left them. I would have left them in the desert roaming around in a circle and find someone else. Because all they did is complain. No matter what God did, they complained. We have no water. Then they get water out of a rock. We're hungry. They get manna in the desert. we hate bread. Give us protein. And they get quail. We hate quail. And we go back to water. And it's just the cycle. All they did, whatever God did, they complained. They were never, they were like little children. They were very much like us. So I'm going to end at this point now, because the next section will be explaining way more in detail, this part 2 of my lecture on Exodus, will be what does all this mean for us today? I would ask you, again, those of you who have it, read the sections I have outlined. If you can read the entire book of Exodus, it is a quick read, because it's story after story after story. Sometimes when you get in the plagues, you might really want to read them, or you might want to pass over them. But the most important part is realize it is in 4 sections, and it's the story of deliverance from Egypt, a covenant in the desert, and the conquest, which we'll talk more about in the next class, in the Promised Land. So I'm going to end the tape here, and then we will have questions.